Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi. You're watching Economics on Business Today television. 5 states across the country, Chhattisgarh, Mizoram, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Telangana are in the process of electing new governments with the results of the voting to be declared on the 3rd of December. This will be the last round of state elections in the current year and will be followed by the big one, the Lok Sabha election, which is scheduled for the middle of next year. Public sector bank, Bank of Baroda, has released a very interesting report on the state of these states that are headed for elections. And for more on the findings, I am joined by Madan Sabnavis, the chief economist of the Bank of Baroda. We are also going to be joined by Jahnavi Prabhakar, economist at the same bank. Madan, welcome to the show. I want you to tell our viewers about what this report is really all about and what is behind this effort that you have put up in this study.
Actually, Siddharth, this particular report is more objective presentation of various economic parameters of these 5 states. So the whole purpose is to give some kind of perspective about how these states stand in terms of growth in GDP, per capita income levels, inflation. The multidimensional poverty measures have also been brought in, and the fiscal balances of states. The whole purpose is to generally provide the readers with a view about how these states stand in relative terms. And this could probably be a good starting point of the agenda of any government, which maybe if it's the existing government which comes to power again, or in case it's a new government which comes, as to what should be the areas which should be targeted. So it's not really any kind of, it's not really a political report. It doesn't say anything about whether the voters are going to be swayed by a particular economic parameter, because there are lots of things which go right in an economy. There are lots of things which may not be looking that good in relative terms. So it's not really a kind of a political kind of a view being given, but it's more a case of very objective economic parameters which have been put on the table.
Okay, since it's focusing on the economic parameters in these 5 states, and obviously Mizoram being the smallest amongst them, the data and you've captured the gross state domestic product over a 5-year period. Take us through what that data means, because clearly Rajasthan followed by Chhattisgarh and then Telangana seem to be the top 3.
Yeah, so we should realize that, all these states begin at different base levels. Then we had the case of the COVID pandemic, we had lockdowns. Subsequently, there has been a recovery across the country. And therefore, what we see is that if you look at, for example, the GDP growth numbers or the GSDP growth numbers, they all seem to be in a similar kind of a magnitude across the states. Of course, some are higher, as what you mentioned, compared to the others. But I think probably the better indicators to look at the overall level of prosperity is to look at the per capita income in current terms, because that actually tells you as to what actually the overall growth process has meant for the citizens of states. And here we see that a state like Telangana probably has the highest per capita income, and then it keeps moving down as you go to the other states. So the basic idea is to say that, okay, if this particular state has a lower per capita income, growth numbers, of course, tend to be distorted because of these base effects of going down and then coming up subsequently. This would be actually the kind of an action point for the government. I think the per capita income, GDP, these are the best indicators for any particular government as to what should be targeted, because you're always looking at higher numbers.
So since we have the per capita details chart on the screen right now, viewers, and we'll bring that chart back up. Madan, like you pointed out, Telangana is the state with the highest per capita amongst these 5, and you can see Telangana followed by Mizoram, followed by Rajasthan, followed by Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. Explain why this would be the case for Telangana and Chhattisgarh clearly fitting into a pattern where despite it being rich in savory minerals, still lacks advanced industrial base in comparison to Telangana.
So actually, look at Telangana. Telangana was a part of the old Andhra Pradesh. So when we had the bifurcation which took place, then we had AP and then we had Telangana. And I remember distinctly at that point of time, I think Andhra Pradesh, in the current Andhra Pradesh, felt that the more productive areas of the overall state had gone to Telangana. So that's how there was this entire dispute about how you need to create a new capital city, and that was something which was supposed to spur the economy of Andhra Pradesh. And Andhra Pradesh traditionally has been one of the more progressive states in terms of industrialization, in terms of service growth, and also agriculture. So I think it's a kind of state which is very much comparable to states like Tamil Nadu or Karnataka in the south, or even states like Maharashtra and Gujarat were coming towards the western side. So I think that's one of the reasons why you had this kind of an advantage where Telangana has started off on a strong footing. So this was very much unlike the Madhya Pradesh Chhattisgarh combination, which was there at one point of time when the state was bifurcated into these two territories. There was no inherent advantage which was there in any particular segment. So what kind of progress we have seen has been primarily, like if you look at Madhya Pradesh, I think a lot of progress has taken place in the agricultural sector. So actually, Madhya Pradesh becomes one of the more progressive agrarian economies, because the government has done a lot of effort to make sure it becomes strong in this particular region.
Okay. At this stage, let me also bring into the debate Jahnavi Prabhakar, economist at the Bank of Baroda. Jahnavi, we've been sort of going over the basic numbers, the state level growth and per capita. Add to the debate, because there's another way to look at it which Madan referred to, that if we were to combine Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, it is still not near Telangana. But when we look at Rajasthan, we see that Rajasthan is the fastest growing state in FY23.
Correct. So like Sir have mentioned already about how these states have been performing, it's also important to know other parameters. So if you see, we've also talked about how inflation has been doing for all of these states. So, and also the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate. If you see in that, Chhattisgarh is around 2%, when states like Rajasthan and Telangana is around 6.5%. Right. But also, of course, this comes with a caveat that if you compare it to the August numbers, the 6.5% and 6% numbers are coming from 8.5% also. In the if you take it forward, if you talk about the unemployment numbers or even the labor force participation numbers, you see clearly Madhya Pradesh at that point is at 1.6, right? Where Rajasthan and Telangana is at 4.4%. This is a comparison for across all the age groups. And India's average for this year was around 3.2. So clearly Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh has been doing relatively better when we talk about on the national stage level. So it's important to look at all of these parameters on a holistic level and not only confine it to one point of it. So inflation and unemployment and labor force participation, which is at 54% high for states like Madhya Pradesh, 48% for states like Chhattisgarh. Even those are important parameters. So look at the broader picture, and if you combine all of those parameters, so economically speaking, these states have been doing well and also have to be compared with the previous year's numbers. And these states have been there for a longer time compared to Telangana, which was recently bifurcated. So it's much easier to compare it to the other bigger states.
Fair point. And Jahnavi, since you took up some of the other data, let's also show our viewers about the position as far as availability of power on a per capita basis is concerned. No surprise, but Rajasthan also leads as far as the capacity of renewable power is concerned. Take us through those data sets as well, Jahnavi.
So if I talk about per capita availability of power, like you mentioned, Telangana again tops the chart out here, pretty high in terms of that. And if I talk about the renewable power, then Rajasthan comes into the picture. So again, these also have been also are the indicators that have to be looked into account when talking about how each of the states have been growing, apart from the GSDP indicators. So clearly, Rajasthan at 10,205 megawatt is double for a state like Madhya Pradesh. Of course, it's also important to understand some of these states are geographically, some states have a distinct advantage in terms of some are more agrarian than others. So in terms of that, if I talk about the forest covers, then Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh will easily take the cake compared to other states. So again, you have to look at from an infrastructure point, Rajasthan and Telangana are doing relatively well. But again, if you talk about other indicators like agriculture and environment, cold storage facilities, food grain availabilities, In terms of that, then you have to also see how Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh are also doing. Again, I would reiterate the point that you have to see the fact that these states also have because geographically speaking are different and distinct from each other. They bring for their own distinct advantage to the place. And I would still feel that Telangana is doing much better and these states can catch up. They have a lot to do, but they can still catch up to a state like Telangana and can perform much better, economically speaking. Social
Absolutely.
aspect and social profile would be a lot different for some of these states.
There's one more data set, viewers, and this is the fiscal deficit at the level of these states, the state fiscal deficit, and that also presents a picture where Telangana clearly comes out right on top of this sample of 5 states. So, mind you, this is not a nationwide analysis. This is confined to the 5 states that are currently in the election process and where we will see results very soon. And if you look at the GSDP for Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, both at 4%, Mizoram at 3.5, Chhattisgarh at 3, and Telangana the lowest at 2.7%. Madan, at this stage I want to come to you and ask you to explain to our viewers what does this mean. It's very clear to the average observer that all these states are at different stages of development, but it's also clear from some of the data that we have discussed here that Telangana clearly leads the other states. Will that be a fair way to consider that Telangana in the south is clearly a leader?
In terms of economic development, we have seen definitely Telangana among these 4 states is a clear leader. If you're looking at the fiscal situation, we should remember one thing, that all states are governed by the FRBM rules, and therefore there are limits to which your fiscal deficit can run. So today, when we are talking of a state like Rajasthan, which typically tends to be having a higher level of fiscal deficit because of the fact that they have not yet fully been compliant when it comes to past sector reforms. Okay, so that's one of the high liabilities which the state has. So that's one of the reasons why we see that Rajasthan has been continuously under pressure in fiscal terms. But if you look at a state like Telangana, they don't have the same kind of problems which Rajasthan has. Madhya Pradesh also to a large extent is free from it, though they do give quite a bit of subsidies when it comes to the power sector. So the fiscal thing to my mind is just a case of what stage they are in right now, because all these numbers are actually governed are monitored very closely by the RBI and the central government. So you have a certain limit, you get a permission for it, and accordingly work to it. But finally, they will all have to move towards the 3.5% mark in the next couple of years.
Madan, follow up to that, and not a political question, but to really ask on behalf of the average viewer, does economics, in your view, at all matter to electoral outcomes given the data that we are seeing?
See, normally I think these macro indicators are meant for people like you and I to discuss on this particular channel. What really influences the voter is actually, I don't think the voter really understands GDP. The voter doesn't understand whether there is fiscal discipline or not. But we have seen in the past, I think people like me who's lived through the 1970s, we have seen that something like price of onions can actually bring the government down at the center. So a thing like inflation is definitely something which does affect voting patterns. And you generally blame the center for it. So even though it could be a localized issue, but you feel that the central government is responsible for it. And therefore, I remember there was that point of time when the Indira Gandhi government came down. Because of the onion crisis, people felt the prices had gone up because of her. So that's one of the things which could be affecting the voting patterns. But otherwise, to my mind, I think these economic numbers may not really get reflected. They go more on the basis of the kind of promises which are made, the kind of policies which are being reiterated time and again. I don't think they're very particular about whether they're implemented. But you make the right kind of announcements, they have the announcement effects, and people look upon the government, the party, in a positive manner.
And since you spoke about onions, I remember that when it comes to Delhi, for example, onions led to a loss for the Bharatiya Janata Party, and ever since it's found it tough to come back in to power in the capital. But let's bring up the inflation data once again, because that's a point that Madan touched upon. And viewers, if you see the inflation data, and let's stay with this for a moment, Chhattisgarh for the full financial year, the previous financial year, it was at 4.7%. In the month of September at 2%. Mizoram quite high at 7.9% and for the month of September at 4.5%. Madhya Pradesh at 7.5 last year. But let's stick only to September and it's clear 3.7%, followed by Rajasthan at 6.5% and Telangana at 6%. So very clearly, Madan and Jahnavi, you can also come in on this. While Telangana has the lowest deficit in this sample, it also has clearly higher availability of power among other factors. But it's pretty much up there along with Rajasthan when it comes to state level inflation. Why would this be the case?
See, essentially, my view, I think Jahnavi can supplement whether she thinks what I'm saying is right or wrong. See, if you look at inflation, the inflation indices in these states have been driven largely by the food basket. And we've seen that food prices have behaved in a differential manner across different states. Like Mizoram, for example, being because of the locational issues, it normally tends to be more vulnerable out there. The similar issue happens to a state like Telangana. Whereas we look at a state like Chhattisgarh, which is also a producer of agricultural produce, there we see that food inflation tends to be more moderated. So suppose we look at things like pulses, we look at something like edible oils. I think because of the proximity to the producer, to the oil seeds producing or the pulses producing states, the inflation could tend to get moderated. So I think whenever there is variation in inflation, we've normally seen it's because of the food basket. Because if we look at the so-called core inflation numbers, they tend to be generally the same across the country. If you leave aside, of course, core inflation does leave aside fuel prices because fuel prices are affected by the VAT structure which is imposed by different states. So if you keep aside fuel products, keep aside the manufactured products, it's generally the food basket which tends to be influencing inflation. I think, Jahnavi, you could give your view on
Jahnavi, you want to add to that?
I completely concur with what Sohail mentioned. Just to add to that, like I mentioned previously, the number seems to be quite high, right? 6.5%. But again, compare it to the August numbers, which was at around 7.5 to 8.5%. Like for Rajasthan, it was around 8.6%. From that, it has come down to 6.5. So there has been a moderation. And again, talking about the national number, it was around, for September, it came around to be 5%, which was a 3-month low, right? Compared to the August number, which was around 6.8. So like Mr. has mentioned, the food inflation has been doing for a long time. And now it has started to cool off. And in the coming months, we expect the prices to cool down further and to see these numbers would be easing off further because of the price pressure will be a lot less now. So, yeah.
Madan, let's come to the broader picture on public finance and not just confined to the data sets that you have presented, but the overall question of the return to the old pension scheme, and that debate has happened in great detail. And the summary of that argument is that for a small section of long tenure, government tenure employees being paid for their entire life versus many more people who have no pension security, and many of them in India don't even have basic income security. Is this going to continue to put pressure on public finances, especially in the run-up to the big national Lok Sabha election?
No, I think it will definitely put pressure on the finances because I don't think there's an easy answer to it. Because whenever we are talking of reverting to the old pension scheme, we should remember that there's been a cutoff date. I think it's been 2014. So can we be having two sets of employees in the same organization having two different pay structures? I think that is a fundamental issue. If it wasn't there for the existing employees, I don't think this controversy would have come up. But I think now that we have it, I think it will always be a bit populist as what people may say. But I would say even from the point of view of natural justice, one may say that there is an argument for saying that everybody has to be treated the same in an organization. So while you're right when you say that it's a very small proportion of the population which will be getting this particular benefit, and it's going to strain the entire budget. So I think that's the second part of it, whether state budgets can actually absorb this kind of a burden. So I think it's a very tough call to take. So I think the quite a few states are trying to go back to the old pension scheme because it's something to placate that particular class. It may be a very small class, but definitely there is an argument from the point of view of social justice that it may not be a very wrong thing, because it's a system which had existed in the earlier days. And the fact that in terms of fiscal prudence, the ability of states to actually meet this kind of commitment, I think this kind of a debate will always carry on.
On the bit on pension, viewers, I want to read and refer to one particular paragraph on state finances, and this is very interesting, and Jahnavi, you can expand on that. Chhattisgarh and Mizoram are less strained by interest burden, with debt levels being manageable. This is not the case with Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Telangana. The picture is different for other committed expenditure in the form of salaries and pensions, which are highest in Rajasthan, followed by Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. You also make the point about how capex as a percentage of total expenditure for Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh is clearly high, given that they are making a big push for infrastructure development. Expand on that, Jahnavi.
Right. So like you mentioned, and the data says clearly pointed out that the percentage share of the capex to the total expenditure for states like Chhattisgarh and for Madhya Pradesh is around 19.5% and 20%, which is a quite a significant numbers compared to other states. And when we talk about the commitment expenditure in this situation, again, states like Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh are above 30%. And Telangana is somewhat lagging behind. Even Rajasthan has been doing relatively well when it comes to the committed expenditure. Talking about the interest burden, we have seen through the numbers that states like Chhattisgarh and Mizoram has relatively lower interest burden because the debt levels are relatively lower, so they are in a much better position to handle their expenses in a much better manner because the interest as a proportion of revenue receipts are relatively lower. Which makes a case that states have to push. Clearly, there is a capex push from states like Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh. Rajasthan is closely following up, but this is where Telangana can pick up pace, and also specifically for committed expenditure, which takes into account salaries and pensions, which are as a proportion of the revenue receipt. Where Telangana is quite lagging behind compared to these states, which with 10% as their percentage share of proportion. So probably this is where the push can be taken up more from the Telangana side and can pick up pace and can move ahead along with other states. While, like you mentioned in the beginning, it has been doing relatively well when it compared to per capita availability of power, other infrastructure indicators. These are some of the indicators that will also bring it on par with other states too.
Madan, as we conclude our conversation, just for you to summarize the overall findings with the cue that you have written that Telangana does the best in terms of per capita income, and we showed that data to you viewers, which is the best indicator of economic prosperity.
Jahnavi can give her view. I think per capita income is finally the best indicator. Normally, as economists, we look at GDP growth, but because of the fact that we have distorted numbers in the last few years, I think we look at the absolute level of per capita income, because the amount of development which is required is contingent on the population which you have. So it's always better to normalize by the population. So I think per capita income is the most important indicator. As long as we see higher levels and growth taking place, I think that would be the best thing for any state to aspire for.
Jahnavi?
I agree with it, but I just want to add on to this fact that, of course, the GSDP numbers, if you see for all the states, are somewhere have grown at a very robust pace of 7.5% to 8%. So again, one indicator I believe would not do justice to it. While adding per capita income does give us a clearer picture, because Telangana is at 3 lakh compared to other states at 1.5 lakh or 1.6 lakh, much higher than the national average of also 1.76 lakh. So per capita income, yes, Telangana is definitely doing better. But also at this time, things like inflation indicators like unemployment and labor force participation can give you a more holistic picture of overall how the economy is doing. So probably I would add on more to those indicators too.
Madan, final word. For those who are not economists and into data, would it be a fair takeaway to say that it's very clear from this data for diverse states? It's not a very uniform sample, frankly, but it's because these are the 5 states that are headed for election. No other design behind this data. It's clear that if you have higher growth, it will translate into higher per capita income, and there could be no other better outcome for any Indian living or residing in any state in India, Madan.
No, absolutely. That's why I still say that per capita income is the best indicator, because it also addresses the issue which Jahnavi had raised about employment. Because if jobs are being created, your growth takes place, and that will get reflected in your per capita income. So everything that the government does or does not do will be contributing to GDP growth, which we need to normalize by the population, so that we get a clearer idea about how prosperous the state is.
Viewers, India does not have one combined cycle of state or federal elections. We are constantly in election mode all through 5 years. Different assemblies have different tenures. There used to be a time when there was more or less a unified election across the country, but as governments fell and governments came in, that cycle got disrupted. So we'll have to wait for that to be able to give you a nationwide sample, or maybe Madan, this is something that you could do in the run-up to the Lok Sabha election, the same exercise, the same data sets, 8 or 10 very beautiful data sets that you've taken out for all the states across the country. But in conclusion, what I have learnt, viewers, from this data and the conversation that we have had with Madan Sabnavis and Jahnavi, it's that there is no other antidote to poverty but growth. And when you have growth, good quality growth, it uplifts everyone, higher per capita income, and although everyone will not have the same levels of income, it is very clear that there is no other formula for prosperity, and hopefully voters will vote keeping this in mind and not any other factors. Madan Sabnavis, Jahnavi Prabhakar, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Economics. If you've liked it, provide us your feedback, and we would also request you to subscribe to Business Today Television. I'll see you again. Until then, goodbye and a very happy Diwali.
Thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us here on BTTV. Coming to you, Anas, first, you said that this year is a record year for big philanthropy. Could you tell us more about that? And